Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie, broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m, broadcasting on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on TikTok. Welcome to everybody coming in across our digital platforms throughout the world. Folks, please, if you can, hit that share button, hit that retweet button, and let's get this word out to as many people as possible. And if you hit the retweet button, do a quote tweet and say something like, great show, worth a watch. And that means you've sent your own tweet, and we will then be able to retweet that tweet. We'll be able to retweet you to 27,000 people throughout the world, helping both you and us with our global outreach. Folks, it is Wednesday the 9th of November, and in our programme tonight, got a packed show. The Sharm El Sheikhdown is well underway in Egypt. Please do send in your comments about that and what you think of it, and if you think it's worthwhile or if you think it's just a big fancy con by the WEF and other people who are just continuing to try to keep us all in panic mode and to keep us frightened and upset about reality, because that's how it appears to us, at least sitting here speaking to you. But more about that. We'll also be looking at our Freedom of Information request, which we made to the so-called quote-unquote Scottish Government to ask them who was paying for the range of propaganda videos that they're putting out advocating separation for Scotland from the rest of the United Kingdom. We're going to be looking at the bill that's been tabled in Parliament, which is suggesting that at future constitutional referendums we have a minimum threshold that must be passed before the vote can be won by the side advocating the change. We've got our On This Day in British History. We've got our Busting Indy Myths Part 21, where we are going to be examining a new theory that the Nats are coming up with now, that the British Union is only somehow based on consent, and that the law has apparently nothing to do with holding the Union together. We're going to be showing how that is absolutely constitutionally illiterate. But what can we expect from the people who are suggesting such nonsense? We'll be examining that. Please do send in your comments, send in your thoughts, send in your greetings. We will read them out. The COP27 carry-on is occurring right now as we speak in a place called Sharm El Sheikh. And I have to credit Mark Stein of GB News for coming up with the amazing phrase, the Sharm El Sheikhdown, which really sums it up. And it's one of these phrases I wish I had come up with, but it was really, really clever. The Sharm El Sheikhdown, and that's what it is. It looks like we are all going to be shaked down for our pennies in order to pay mysterious reparations to the rest of the world for things that never happened or are unlikely to happen, while scaring us all into the bargain. So what are your thoughts on that? This time last year actually, it was COP26, and it was held here in the great British city of Glasgow, just a few yards really from our office. And we did what we could to keep the British end up, as always, and to try in such a context of madness to bring in a little bit of sense into the proceedings. And one of the things that we did is we got a banner put together which was emphasising that the main threat to the United Kingdom energy supply is not the sun melting or the sun getting hotter or whatever it is they think the sun's going to do, blow up maybe. It is in fact the huge numbers of people coming into the country that don't have anywhere to live, and the amount of energy that is required to actually cater for them. That's, of course, a very politically incorrect point that not a single person at COP26 will be talking about, other than encouraging even more of it. And in fact, there was somebody I saw today on Twitter saying that people are coming from Albania because it's the temperature in Albania. They're escaping the temperature. And I don't know if the temperature is colder than it normally is, or if it's hotter than it normally is, or if it's more temperate than it normally is. But apparently this was an excuse for why they're crossing the English Channel. I mean, seriously, folks, the absolute madness that gets put in front of our faces, and we're asked to believe such nonsense. And there always will be people who believe it, but unfortunately, it's just so much nonsense put in front of our faces. Anyway, last year, and Becky says it may not be PC, but it's true, 100%. And so last year, one of the things that we could do in such a context of madness was to actually document accurately the marches, because we were alerted to the fact that there was going to be a big march. The big march was going to be on this Friday, the 6th of November. And the media, the fake news, had already decided that there was going to be 100,000 on it. Now, we, of course, know that in Glasgow, there's no routes that you could take 100,000 people down without it lasting for hours and hours and hours and hours, and probably into the next day. So we knew that was just nonsense, but that's what the media had already decided upon. So we thought what we'll do is we'll video it and we'll count it, which is what we did. And we have an article which you'll find in the comment thread there. And we videoed it from the beginning to the end. It was 2 hours and 10 minutes. And there was, exactly as it happened, 13,000 on it. 13,000, 13,000, not 100,000, not even close to that, which of course we knew that's what it was likely to be. But of course the fake news media just pushed the 100,000 the next day and throughout the world, even though we had already put up our video, which you can see at on our website. Just go to November 2021. And you'll also find the link in the comments there. 13,000, not 100,000, and we've documented it, and anybody can count that video for themselves if they have the time and the patience. And while they won't get exactly 13,000, they will get within 2 or 3% difference either way. No question about that. And we do that at all these events in order to document it for somebody somewhere down the line in history going, was there really 100,000 at that? I wonder if somebody's worked it out. Oh, here's a video showing that in fact it's 13,000. Thank you very much to A Force for Good. My point there is that it's all hype. It's all hype. It's all 100,000 people. And let me tell you, there was nobody there from Glasgow. None of the 13,000 were from Glasgow. They were from all over the world and from London probably, and Hampstead and places like that. And the only Scots that were there was a rabble of about 200 hangers-on from the All Under One Banner people that slouched past at the very end of the march. They were the only native Scots there. Anyway, because most people have a normal life, you know. And Paul says something that's very right. He goes, we should only let in the insanity of the present world into our minds in small doses. That's so true. That's so true, because they're trying to create a new race of human that believes anything that the media tells them. Anyway, you'll find your common sense, your hour's common sense injection here at Good Evening Britain for an hour a week. Alan says, has anybody watched the SAS Rogue Heroes? Is it any good? Another famous Scot, David Stirling, who is credited with inventing the SAS. I know of the programme, I haven't seen it. Thanks for the comments coming in here on TikTok. A good number of viewers on TikTok as well. As Jack says, the SNP members are seething. They absolutely are. We love to seethe them up with our wit and rhetoric, which they can't stay away from. It's Remembrance Week. That flag, we don't have any more flags. Somebody's asked. We don't have any more of that flag, but what we do have is we have that flag in a saltire. We've only got a couple of those left, and we've also got Battle of Britain remembrance flags, and I think we've only got a couple of these left now as well. I want to talk about our Freedom of Information request, which we have made to the quote-unquote Scottish Government. Now, they've got a programme running at the moment, a project which they're calling, here it is here, which they're calling Building a New Scotland, okay? And part of this project involves putting up silly little videos promoting nonsense on Twitter. And they did one a couple of weeks ago, and they're doing them all the time, of course, but we thought, well, we'll just focus in on one of the little videos, and it was saying that small countries throughout the world can do very well on their own, so why can't Scotland do well on its own? You know, it's that argument. It's not even an argument, it's just like a statement. And we'll just got a wee picture of that, of one of just a screenshot there of the video, which we'll stick up. And it was like Ireland, Denmark, I don't know, the Faroe Islands, the Solomon Islands. There we go. Many independent European nations are more successful than the UK, so why not Scotland? Discover how we can build a new Scotland together at gov.scot/New Scotland. Okay? Now, that's not the SNP saying that. That's not even the so-called Scottish executive saying that. That's the actual civil service saying that. Okay, that's the Scottish Government Twitter and web page, which is run by the civil service in Scotland. So it's civil servants making that video and putting it out there for the benefit of their SNP masters. Now, that shouldn't be allowed. What country in the world allows its civil service to advocate the destruction of its own self? Well, welcome to madcap Britain in the 21st century. Not only do we allow it, but we pay the people that do this massive amounts of money. So we made a Freedom of Information request asking, please can you tell us, one, which department of the Scottish Government produced this particular video? Okay, which particular department was it? How much did it cost to produce this particular video? Which department is promoting this Building a New Scotland project? What is the annual budget for the department which is promoting this Building a New Scotland project? And where does the money come from at source to pay that department? And this is the thing that we don't know, because in Scotland the funding mechanisms are so complex. You've got British taxpayers' money, you've got money that's taken only from Scottish taxpayers, you've got the Barnett formula, you've got UK government grants, you've got all sorts of funding mechanisms. It's very difficult to find out where the money actually comes from. It's one of the things that devolution has done. It really has mucked up one's ability to understand how the public sector is funded. And this is a problem that we all face, whether we're unionists or nationalists. We don't know where the money's coming from, because it's coming from all sorts of different places. It's very convoluted, but we're going to try to get to the bottom of it. But at the end of the day, basically what's happening is it's coming out of our pockets, okay? Nationalists and unionists alike. And it really bugs me when it's coming out of unionist pockets, right? Of course it does, because we are funding the breakup of our country. And I say this to people, you know, how are we as unionists expected to compete against that when money coming out of our pocket is going to the Scottish executive? They're giving it to the civil servants who are using it to destroy the UK. That's so messed up. It's so messed up, and it's only in soft touch Britain where that is allowed. It has to stop. It really has to stop, and we've been very clear about this from the very beginning. This has to end, okay? And if you want an easy win, Rishi Sunak, then you stop the civil service from promoting policies which are deliberately intended to break up the UK. Okay, don't stop them from promoting other SNP policies about infrastructure and education and health and all that kind of stuff. That's their job. But stop them from being engaged in projects, the aim of which is to destroy the UK. That should be off limits in any intelligent, commonsensical society. Will it ever happen? Who knows? But it really is incredible, because here's an article from the National saying that the Indy Ref 2 preparation team at Holyrood grows to 22 civil servants, led by a bloke who is on 83,000, several of whom are on £75,000, 6 of whom are on £65,000, and one is on £47,000, with the rest being on £36,000. I mean to say, come on, that's just unbelievable. Holyrood Ref prep team at Indy Ref 2 prep team at Holyrood grows to 22 members. We depend upon the British government to look out for us. We can't stop this. It's the British government that has to stop this. Paul says these civil servants should be sacked. Alan asked, did you see the Greens' new pamphlet on Indy? No, we haven't seen the Scottish Cabbage Party's pamphlet on Indy, but if anybody does see it, well, I suppose we could see it if we wanted on So that's our freedom of information request, and it's going to be a good one, because we're going to hopefully get some good information from that, and that'll help us to at least move the debate on a little bit more. But it has to end. It has to end. Absolutely has to end, because we don't want to have a second separation referendum any more than we want a referendum on whether or not we should drive a bus over a cliff. You know, this is something that we don't want to happen. Okay, that's why we don't support it. It's like asking us to support something that we don't want to happen. We don't want to drive a bus over a cliff. We don't think it's a good idea to have a referendum to drive a bus over a cliff. It's only going to end badly. It's not something we want to be part of. It's not something we want anything to do with. We don't want what they want. We don't want to drive a bus over a cliff. That's why we don't want a second referendum. It's not our policy. It's something we're against. We support the United Kingdom. We don't support anything which is going to break it up. Oh, but if we had a referendum, that would prove whether you're right or wrong. We've no interest in being proven right or wrong. We don't want it to happen. Oh, don't you trust the people? It's not about trusting the people. Everybody trusts the people. You can trust the people without wanting a second referendum. Don't tell us that because we trust the people, that means we want a second referendum. And don't tell us that if we don't want a second referendum, that we don't trust the people, okay? You've got to be wise to all of these things. I heard Angus Robertson going, we can all agree to trust the people. Well, can we? That's not the issue. Nobody's really disputing that. But he's like trying to get us all to agree that, oh yeah, let's trust the people. Okay then, next move, let's have a referendum. See how that worked? They inveigled us into that. No. That's a completely different matter. A completely different matter. Don't try to fool us, Mr. Robertson. In fact, I'm going to do a Busting Indie Myths about that rhetoric sometime in the future, about how to spot that kind of rhetoric. It's because it seems reasonable. Oh, I think we can all agree to trust the people. Yeah, we all trust the people. Well, let's have another referendum. No, let's not. Folks, on this day in British history, because British history matters, because we don't know where we're going if we don't know where we are, and we don't know where we are if we don't know where we have been. And on this day, 9th of November in 1989, it didn't happen in Britain, but it was certainly part of British history. It was when the Berlin Wall came down. And Britain was heavily involved in that matter, of course, because we had British armed forces based in what was then West Germany, and they had been based in West Germany since the end of the war. Why were they based in West Germany? Well, some people would say it was to keep an eye on the Germans. Other people would say it was to keep an eye on the Russians, who were on the other side of the wall, along with their union of Soviet Socialist republics that we were told at the time were poised to invade us all. So the wall was created to separate West Berlin, which was in the Allied territory, from East Berlin, which was in the communist territory. And of course it became an iconic symbol of the Cold War, the standoff, as it were, between the West and the East. And I know this because I used to live in Germany. I lived in Germany for about 2 years. And I lived in Germany during this time. I say I lived in Germany. I mean, my parents lived in Germany, and I was just hanging around with them as a 5-year-old does at the time. But I remember it very clearly. And my dad was in the British Army at the time. And I remember going to visit Checkpoint Charlie, which was the go-between area between East and West, where you could go through the wall, and it was called Checkpoint Charlie for some reason. I remember that clearly. And then around about 18 years later, the wall came tumbling down. And it was said to be a pivotal event, which it certainly was, which marked the end of the Iron Curtain, and indeed the soon-to-be end of the Cold War. As a consequence of that, the border between West Germany and East Germany fell very rapidly, and it was in October of the next year, which is to say October 1990, that Germany was unified again. And I remember not so long ago a good friend of mine who's passed away now. He was a colonel in the British Army, and he was one of my mentors. Huge respect for the chap, and he taught me a lot. And I always remember him telling me that when he was in the British Army, he made a career out of it. Obviously, he was always looking over the Berlin Wall, he used to say. And he told me that it was only when he retired that he realised he had been looking the wrong way. And that always struck me as an incredible thing for a colonel in the British Army to say, but obviously what he meant by that was that the real enemy is always within the nation, it's not necessarily without. And I also remember where I was actually on the morning of the 10th of November, which was the day after the Berlin Wall came down the previous night. And I remember it was my mum that told me. She goes, "Have you heard the news? The Berlin Wall's come down." I was like, "Whoa, that's big. That's big." So that was on this day in 9th of November 1989. And talking about the British Army, it was called the British Army of the Rhine, which is a fantastic name. BAOR, or BAOR for short. And great name, British Army of the Rhine. And I was just thinking about that today, and I thought, we've got some British Army paraphernalia from that time, or at least from the mid-1970s. And this is a recruiting leaflet that's in the office here, the Army of the 70s. I must have picked up in about 1974, I think. And on the back, it's got a wee spiel here about the British Army of the Rhine. And it says, BAOR is a completely self-contained mobile force with a strength of over 50,000 men. It plays a major role in the defence of Europe, being assigned specific responsibilities by NATO. Its main area of operation is North Germany. A brigade is located in the British sector of Berlin. It's composed of several divisions, and from each division come the men and equipment for the fighting organisations known as battle groups, which have been specially developed by British military experts for European defence. British Army of the Rhine, eh? Well, their job kind of effectively ended when the war came down. Oh, I meant to say, this is an amazing wee pamphlet, because it opens out. It gives you all this information here about ranks and everything like that, and where its armies located throughout the world, and then it opens into a poster. The Army of the 70s Battle Group. They don't make them like that anymore, I can tell you. I mean, I hate to think what a British Army recruiting leaflet is like these days. I hate to think. Paul says the world celebrated German unity in 1989 despite the sins of that nation. How much more should we celebrate British unity? Indeed. Michael says he didn't recognise me for a moment with the new haircut. It's me. TR18 says, will you ever bring back your Spotify podcast back? They were a good listen. We broadcast on Spotify every week, TR18. All our podcasts, we broadcast on about 9 platforms. Spotify is definitely one of them. Just search for UK, A Force for Good, Good Evening Britain, something like that. You should be able to find it. If you don't, please do tell us, because we would want to know about that if it wasn't working, but I'm pretty sure it is. Debbie says, I lived at RAF Wildenrath, January 88 to October 89. Very good. I was in Fallingbostel, I believe was the name of the German place where the British Army was based, that my dad was in anyway. And so Paul says, quite rightly, Germany lost World War II and was divided. The Soviet Union lost the Cold War and broke up. But the British were the victors, so why should we suffer the same fate as them? Why should we be breaking up? Oh, it's a good point. It's a good point. Now, just so folk know, remember, we're waiting for the Supreme Court to announce whether or not the SNP can hold a second referendum. Now, we're probably not going to know until the actual morning that they announce it. And that afternoon, we're going to take a team over to Holyrood, and we are going to keep the British end up with posters and flags. And we've got to be there, because the Scottish nationalists are going to be there having a cry and moan pity party. And so we've got to be there to rejoice while they cry into their handkerchiefs. Okay, so if you want to join us, send us your name via that contact at A Force for Good email address. We'll add you to our email list. We'll add you to our text message list. And as soon as we hear, we'll contact you and we'll say, all stations go. We're going to be outside Holyrood on whatever day it is. But if you want to join us, as I say, we won't know until the actual day. Please do contact us and say, if you've already contacted us to say you'd like to join us, we've already got your name and your details, and you've already been added to the list. Kenny says the Supreme Court is due to kick them into touch soon. It's going to be probably between next week and the middle of December. So if anybody's got any advanced knowledge about it, please do tell us, because we need all the intelligence on that particular matter that we can get. Yeah, so that's the Supreme Court matter, and that's going to be the Supreme Court saying that the law does not allow the Scottish nationalists to have a second referendum. Which brings us on very nicely to Busting Indy Myths, Part 21. Busting Indy Myths, Part 21. And we are busting Indy myths on the daily, weekly, monthly and yearly until the Scot Nats see clearly that we're down with the capital U to the K to the A to the double F G. And in this Busting Indy Myths Part 21, we're going to address the recently heard notion that the United Kingdom is somehow based only on consent of its parts and not on law. The implication being here that if one part does not consent to being part of the union any longer, then it's game over for the entire union. And this is a relatively recent Scottish nationalist innovation, and we've only been hearing it in the last few weeks, actually. And I'm not going to name the names of the people who are pushing this around, but there's some quite well-connected people who are thinking this is the next big argument that the SNP are going to win on. Well, they can't win on it because they're entirely wrong, as usual, on things. You know, so and it was brought to my attention when a BBC presenter interviewed Keir Starmer at the weekend there on the Sunday show, and it was a little bit of a cheeky interview, I have to say. And I have to say the BBC presenter was really he seemed to have an agenda in some of the ways that he was saying things, but one of the sort of questions that he asked was something to the extent that, is Scotland in a voluntary union? And Keir Starmer said, well, yes, of course. But you see, what was meant there, again, it's sneaky. It's if you're saying, is Scotland in a voluntary union, and you agree to that without clarifying what you mean, then they'll say, well, then, if you should consent to another referendum, then. They'll demand that we agree to another referendum based only on the principle of consent and not on the principle of law as well. And that's the way that they play. And we'll be hearing a lot more of this when the Supreme Court judgment comes out. And why do they do this? Well, firstly, it is rubbish. The British Union has been based on laws as well as consent since the very start of it in 1707. And every day laws help the British Union to continue to operate. So the British Union is certainly based on laws as well as consent, and the two should not be thought to exist only on their own. Because the UK is a unitary state, which is a state governed as a single entity in which the central government is the supreme authority. And laws are critical to the operation of such a unitary state. But they do this because they want us to believe that the United Kingdom Parliament, the Parliament that is running the unitary state, the nationalists want us to believe that that Parliament should have no say in the destruction of that unitary state, and that everybody else in the United Kingdom should just stand watching helplessly as the union crumbles around them because there's no law holding it together. That's what they want us to believe. They're trying to get rid of the idea that the union can be held together by law, as well as consent. So what's the pro-UK frame then? The nationalist frame is that the union is only held together by consent. The pro-UK frame is that it is held together by consent and also by law. And it is held together by law because everybody else in the United Kingdom is involved in this, and they need to have a way of having their say. And they have their say through the British Parliament, which is the Parliament that is responsible for keeping the United Kingdom together. Democratically speaking, all the parts of the United Kingdom should be involved and considered and indeed protected where necessary. And we, as Unionists, consider those elements. Everybody has to be involved. It's the British Parliament, the Union Parliament, which is responsible for involving everybody in such a massive event as the potential destruction of the unitary state and the nation itself. Because, as I say, we're more than just a voluntary union based on consent. We're also a legal union based on laws. We're bound both by consent and by law. And that's the way that it should be. That's how a nation operates. A nation operates on law. There's nothing controversial about that. The laws are there to ensure that we're all involved and we're all considered, and if necessary, we're protected from the actions of any one of the parts that decides to go off and do its own thing. And this is why we're not like the EU. The United Kingdom is not like the EU, okay? The EU is simply a voluntary union where one of its members can, if it wants, go off and decide to do its own thing, as in fact Britain did. There is no overarching laws or parliament in the EU which can forbid and prevent a member nation leaving. But there is in the United Kingdom, because we are one nation, and so we have to have laws to keep that one nation together. So, in conclusion, we can say that Scotland is part of the United Kingdom, which is a unitary state, with the British Parliament at its centre. The UK is more than a voluntary union based on consent. It is also a legal union based on law. We are bound both by consent of the parts and by the law at the centre. And we must be bound by law because all of us must be involved and considered and protected where necessary in any constitutional matter. And thank goodness that's the case, because pro-UK folk, throughout the United Kingdom, we want to know that we're held together by something more substantial than the momentary whim of a minority of the Scottish electorate at a one-off referendum on one day, which could be won by a tiny margin, which would represent a minuscule proportion of the overall UK electorate. Okay, we all want to know that we're protected from that. We all want to know that the United Kingdom is holding together by something more substantial than that. So here endeth Busting Indy Myths Part 21. We've written an article on that particular matter where you can see a lot of what I just said written down, and you'll find that in the comments threads where it's called "The Union is Bound by Consent and by Law," which brings us on quite nicely actually to a matter that occurred today or yesterday in the British Parliament. The DUP MP Ian Paisley has brought forward a private member's bill which is advocating that at any future constitutional referendum anywhere in the United Kingdom there should be thresholds in place. And a threshold is a barrier that has to be jumped before the referendum can be won. For example, at previous referendums, the theory has been that if you get 50% of the vote on the day plus one, then you win the referendum. And many of us have thought, well, that's not ideal, really, because it means that a referendum can be won with an awful lot of people, very, very possibly the majority of people, not even agreeing to it. So Paisley's come up with this idea that there should be a minimum of 50% plus one of the entire electorate voting for the matter before it can pass. And that's just common sense, really. That's just common sense. But oh my goodness me, the nationalists have gone into meltdown, as they always do on that particular matter. And that's good to know, because it means they're being challenged for a change. Paisley made the point, he goes, "This is an issue we cannot afford to leave entirely to the moment," quoted today in the Belfast Telegraph. We can't leave it to the actual time. We've got to be thinking about this beforehand. We've got to consider, as he puts it, quote, "what constitutes a legitimate manifestation of consent for a constituent nation of the United Kingdom to dissolve the United Kingdom." Goodness me, I don't even like saying those words. But it certainly has to be a big, big barrier before you do something like that. It absolutely has to be. And he says, we need a conversation now, when the question is not urgently pressing itself on us. He says, "My bill can facilitate a conversation about these matters. It will not bind future parliaments, but I hope it will influence them." Well, good for him for bringing that to the attention of the Parliament. Unfortunately, I have to say, it's a private member's bill, which means that he'll be lucky to even get it debated. Very few members' bills ever go as far as getting passed. And I have to say, Westminster does have kind of an archaic bill processing situation or whatever. You know, it's very difficult to pass a bill in Parliament. It's difficult for anybody who's not the government of the day to pass a bill or to come forward with the idea for one. But nevertheless, he's taken advantage of this private member's bill opportunity to do so, and I wish him the very best of luck on it. And the good thing is, at least it's creating a conversation around the matter. And I just want to bring up a graphic here which can show the importance of having a conversation about this. Because imagine if a referendum were held tomorrow in Scotland. Okay, this is what we could be facing. We could be facing a tiny minority of people breaking up the entire United Kingdom. So let's put this graphic up. How a tiny number of people could break up the UK. Let's crunch the figures. So I crunched the figures last week using the latest electoral figures from the ONS. And you're looking there at an overall UK electorate of almost 49 million and an electorate in Scotland of 4,245,000. Now, let's presume that we had a referendum and it was the same turnout of 85%. That means that 3,608,000 people would vote in Scotland. Now, say the referendum was won by the Nationalists by 51 to 49%, although of course it could be a lot closer. What that would mean is the referendum to break up the UK would be won by a measly 1,840,000 people, which represents 3.77% of the overall UK electorate. It's utterly absurd to imagine that 3.77% of the overall UK electorate could break up the greatest nation in the world, because that 1,840,000 isn't even a majority of the electorate of the people of Scotland. Think about that. And even we've worked it out there, if the winning figures were reversed and it was 55% to break up and 45% to stay, that would still only be 1,984,640, which is still a minority of the overall Scottish electorate and only 4% of the overall UK electorate. In what democratic universe does it make sense for, let's say, 4% of a nation's electorate to break up the entire country? It's morally wrong and it's utterly absurd. Okay, now you can find those exact words in that article, a union bound by consent, not only law, that we posted a couple of days ago. You can find those figures in our recent article. In the final few minutes, I want to talk about a statue today. A statue of the Queen was unveiled, the first one that we've seen. It's on the front of York Minster, and it's designed by Richard Bossons, the Minster's stonemason, and it's quite a nice one. It's quite good. There it is there. It's one of those ones that sits up above the entrance. So yeah, I think he's done well with that one. And it put us in mind, the likeness is okay. It put us in mind of the Diana statue, which is in Kensington Gardens, which is an interesting statue as well. Some people took exception to it, saying it wasn't a very good likeness of Princess Diana. Some people said that it looked more like Face from the A-Team. And there you go. Some people weren't impressed with the Diana statue when it came out, and saying it's about time Face had a statue after being sent to prison by a military court for a crime he didn't commit, and then promptly escaping from a maximum security stockade to the Los Angeles underground. Yeah. Talking about other crazy stuff today, there was a graphic that I saw that a Scottish nationalist was putting out, because they love to obsess about the world falling apart, and this guy put out a graphic saying that in 2100, which is to say that's 67 years from now, right? The oceans are going to rise by 100 metres, okay, in the next 67 years. Anyway, this is what Britain is going to look like if the waters rise by 100 metres. I'm glad to say the United Kingdom is still there. The Ireland looks like it could be in a little bit of trouble, though, the island of Ireland. Down in the south there, in the south of England, Sadiq Khan's London has been absolutely flooded, but that will probably make for some very interesting scuba diving at the turn of the next century, checking out all the ancient ruins underneath there. For some reason, the White Cliffs of Dover have also been swallowed up, so that gives you an idea of how much they imagine the waters are going to rise in the next 67 years. The White Cliffs of Dover get swallowed up, but somehow the south of Scotland is almost there in its entirety, I'm glad to say. And there around Birmingham, in the middle of England, looks like quite a nice little water feature, which you could probably enjoy sailing your boat around. And what it will make it difficult for, though, is our migrant friends coming over from Albania. They're not really going to know where to land, but at least we might have some. At least they've got the dinghies, so they can do a wee trip through all the waterways and come right up here, probably to Newcastle or Sunderland, or they could continue right up and go right up there to Cooper. For some reason, Cooper is got an island all to itself now. But somebody put this out, and this was put out, okay, that was put out by a person who calls himself a serious journalist, or at least he fancies himself to be a serious journalist. He gets books published almost every year by the Scottish book establishment, and he put that out seriously thinking, like, this is a danger. If we don't get this sorted in 67 years, this is what he said the United Kingdom is going to look like, which I thought was funny because he's a well-known Scottish nationalist. But he says that's what the United Kingdom is going to look like. What's the mad world is he living in? The seas haven't risen for thousands of years, but in the next 67 years, they're going to rise by 100 metres. Is this sort of mentality what we're dealing with is just absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy stuff. And of course, as Stephen says, at the end of the 80s, the scientists were talking about the coming ice age. And you know what? In 2100, they'll just wheel out that old graphic again and say this is what Britain's going to look like in 2200. They will. That's the modus operandi. Or you could buy a flat at the top of the Shard. Nelson's going to move up to Glasgow. Folks, thanks to all our Unionist friends and supporters for joining us this evening. We will see you next week. So it just remains for me to say, folks, thanks very much for watching. Thanks for all your comments on TikTok as well. I read them all. I do appreciate them. The good, the bad, and the indifferent. Great stuff. And also, thank you to everybody on the other platforms. Just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next week.